All right, this is part 3 of the Algebra Chapter 10 practice test. This says find the inverse of the function and write it on the answer line. All right, cool, then graph it. You know what, I'm going to nix the graphing. Don't worry about graphing for now. It's just going to be a line or a square root function, and we know that you can do that. I'm more interested in just, can you find the inverse of this? Okay, inverses are where we are going to take all of the inputs and outputs that are here, and we're going to switch them so that the inputs become the outputs and the outputs become the inputs. But what would that function look like? So if you have f of x is equal to 4x minus 3, the first step is to write this as y equals, that's a great y equals 4x minus 3. And then to switch the inputs and the outputs, we can just switch the x's and the y's. You might be asking why we would ever do this. There's lots of reasons. Chief among them is that usually these variables represent things. Sometimes it's good to know how does somebody's age predict their shoe size, but sometimes it's good to know, based on the shoe sizes we have, what ages are these, intended for. So you can see where different scenarios will require thinking of the function in different ways. So now that we've switched it, we solve for y. I add 3 to both sides, so I get x plus 3 equals 4y. Now, just like the multiplication property of equality, when you divide both sides of an equation by the same number, you have to divide all of the terms by that same number. X over 4 is the same as 1/4 x. This is 3/4. This cross cancels. I'm going to write it this way, which is up here. Y equals, and then instead of x over 4, I'm going to write 1/4 x. And then plus 3/4. Okay. All right, over here we have number 13. You start with a quadratic function. So negative 3x squared, or f of x equals negative 3x squared plus 7. And I don't know if you guys remember this, but the vertex, if there's no bx term, says that there's no horizontal translation, so you can just translate up 7 units. So the vertex is at 0, 7. Now that's going to give it's actually upside down because of this a. So it's going to give you like this upside down parabola, but notice they only want the side of the parabola that's positive, on the positive right side of the y-axis. And the reason for this is that the inverse of a quadratic, where it's x squared, is going to be a square root function. And if you remember with the square root function, it's like a parabola on its side. We don't want both sides of the parabola, otherwise it doesn't pass the vertical line test and it's not a function. So the process is much the same. There's just a restriction in the domain, which honestly you don't need to worry about. Whatever this restriction was here, it's going to be the same restriction in the inverse, but it's not even going to matter in the end anyway. Let's just focus on using the technique that we've already done on number 12, where we replace or substitute y in for f of x. Man, I'm never going to make a decent y, but okay. Negative 3x squared plus 7. Okay, now I subtract 7 from both sides, so I get y, what'd I tell you? Minus 7 is equal to negative 3x squared. I divide everything by negative 3, so that becomes, or I did this wrong. This is supposed to be an x. I'm supposed to switch. There, that's supposed to be an x, and this is supposed to be a y. Remember, kids, if you use a thick enough pen, you're always right. That's a y. Can you see it? It's a beautiful y. I think the joke I said is that it's been in quarantine, so it grew a lot of hair. Okay, anyways, I have to solve for y. So this is x over here. This is supposed to be a y. All right, there we go. Yeah, beautiful. Okay, so I switched my x and my y. I'm solving for y, subtracted 7 from both sides. Now I have to divide everything by negative 3. X divided by negative 3 is the same as negative 1/3 x. And negative 7 divided by 3 is the same as positive 7/3 equals y squared. And then I end up taking the square root of both sides, and I get y equals the square root of negative 1/3 x plus 7/3. All right, everybody. So that brings us to the end. If you have any questions, as always, let me know. Apologize for some of these mistakes that I'm making here. Hopefully it's clear enough. And if it's not, you can always just hit me up.